Hi everyone, my name is Fatma and you're listening to The Papercut. The Papercut is a podcast about books and reading from the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia, sprinkled in with a little bit of everywhere else. Today is episode number 1 and I'm going to be discussing Celestial Bodies, a novel by Omani author Jokha Al Harthi. It was translated into English by Marilyn Booth and published by Sandstone Press. It's won the Man Booker International Prize for 2019, and I'm really proud to say that this was the first time that an Arab author has won the prize. So it's really satisfying to know that an Omani woman won the prize. Incidentally, this is the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that an Omani woman has published a novel in English by an international press. So the fact that the first time an Omani woman publishes a novel in English and it immediately gains this level of recognition tells me that there is a lot of potential that remains to be discovered in the Arab literary world, especially in the Gulf region. I sat down with the editor of Celestial Bodies, Kay Ferrell, over in Scotland. Well, metaphorically sat down with her. She is based in Scotland. We had a discussion over the phone. We talked about Celestial Bodies, the plot of the book, its characters, and some of its main themes. And Kay was nice enough to also give us a little sneak peek into some of the projects that Sandstone Press is involved in, and I think they are fascinating. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed speaking to her.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so can you just give me a brief sort of synopsis of what Celestial Bodies is about?
So Celestial Bodies starts as the story of 3 sisters living in a small village in Oman. Mm-hmm. But it grows to be far more than that. I mean, from this starting point, it kind of sprawls out to talk about their families, families connected with theirs, families who've been slaves in the area, and it really covers a transitional period in Omani history. Mm. And there's the sense that these sisters are caught between, their own desires and the weight of traditional expectations and the modernizing world. So it's a really well-drawn portrait of a time of great change through this one family.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true that the way in which the story unfolds itself is so complementary to the way in which a story would unfold itself in Oman, if that makes sense. Like, everything is connected, families are highly interconnected across villages, across towns, and across the social sort of ladder. I love the way, one of the things that the book was really praised for was its structure, and I think that this is part of that, the way in which all of the narratives are connected to one another.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that the structure of the book has a lot of really interesting aspects to it, and I think what's really universal about it is the way that it informs how the reader follows the characters. Quite early in the book we learn about how Maya feels about her marriage, and then we sort of hear later from her husband Abdallah how that is affected him, the way she treats him, how he feels about it. And so the way it's structured means that as you go through the book, your perceptions of the characters shift. And I think that's much about the characterization, it's about the structure, but it really helps build this idea, which is a theme that you see in so much literature, that other people are really unknowable in a fundamental way, and I think that's handled brilliantly in this text.
Yeah, actually, one example of that, which I noticed early on, was in the shift between, I think it was Maya's narrative and Abdullah, where she talks about when she had her first child, her first daughter, and the family started to give gifts that are given at the beginning of the once a woman gives birth. And she mentioned something like sacrifice one cow and 40 chickens or something like that. And immediately in the next chapter, Abdullah is recalling this. Obviously, it's been a span of many, many years, and he's remembering this time in his life, and he remembers it completely differently. And it's not remarked upon as that he remembers it completely differently. It's very subtle, and he just mentions in passing in his narrative that he remembers two goats, 20 chickens, and some other smaller gifts. And I had to actually go back and say, wait, that's not right. And so I love that little bit of conflict that she sort of just slipped in there, and it kind of shows the way people's memories play tricks on them, and it ends up forming parts of themselves and their opinions without even realizing it.
Absolutely, and I think the unreliability of memory is another kind of universal aspect which makes the book appeal to so many different people, because because again, the shifting, and you don't know who the reliable narrators are, and that is completely true of life, that two people can have very different memories of a particular event down to the facts of it, never mind their emotional interpretations of what happened. And so I think it's really subtly and well done. Yeah, absolutely, I would agree.
So despite the fact that the themes are pretty universal, Oman itself is a very little known country, I think, around the world. I think that's fair to say. I'm from Oman. I can own up to that. But I mean, it'd
be fair to say that the average British person doesn't know much about Oman.
Yeah, but I mean, it's been amazing to me to see the acclaim that it's received. And did you face any particular challenges in marketing this book to an English-speaking audience at all?
I mean, there were definitely a few challenges in getting the word out about the book, but I don't think they were specifically because the book comes from Oman. The sad truth is that here in Britain, book review space is shrinking all the time. Most of the major newspapers have reduced their space physically. So you have maybe space for 3 or 4 reviews where you might have had a whole page previously. And while there's radio programs, there are streams, but it can be very difficult unless you have one of the year's really big books to get a lot of attention for it. Getting attention for any author who isn't already well known in the UK can be difficult, and we do find that work in translation poses an additional kind of challenge. That said, there were some who really supported the book from early on, and I'd particularly like to mention the Edinburgh International Book Festival. They are really committed to showcasing diverse authors. So for them, I think having an author come from, as we were saying, a little-known country was actually a benefit, because they're really dedicated to increasing people's exposure to different cultures and different types of writing. And then it sort of snowballed from there. There were international book clubs who were kind of reading around the world and so on and so forth. And this having been, as far as we know, the first book by an Omani female author to be translated into English. That helped it more on kind of the indie side, and then it got more and more into the mainstream as the competition acclaim came in. So yeah, it was challenging, but it also gave us a few unique hooks to work with, which was great.
So you were the editor for the English translation of this book. What was your personal experience working on this book?
Well, I mean, Sandstone Press, which published the book in English, first of all, quite small. We're based in the north of Scotland, and because we're an independent publisher, it means that you sometimes get to take risks on projects that you're very passionate about, and for me that was this one. And I remember it came in, we got the manuscript. The manuscript had the translation already existed when it came to us, which was critical. I mean, I know that that might seem in itself to pose an obstacle to a lot of people who would like to have their work considered for translation, but it meant that we don't have anyone in the office who reads Arabic, and because we are smaller, and so the fact that there was a full English translation already available meant that we were able to consider it in with our other manuscripts and submissions, whereas it would have posed much more of a challenge if we hadn't had that. So I read it the way I would read any manuscript in English which came in, and I just absolutely loved it. I fell in love with the storytelling, and my colleague at the time, Ciara Donaghy, she's now with the Scottish Book Trust, but at the time she was our marketing officer, and the two of us kind of passed it back and forth, and were very, very excited about it. And then the two of us kept going in to talk to the boss and say, but it's brilliant and we really want to do it. And so we have that freedom here. So I think that was, it was really exciting. It was a very fresh voice, certainly from our perspective. Again, probably because it is from Oman, which neither of us knew anything about. So I'm by no means an expert on Arab literature at all. And I just, this was one of the first that I'd really read, and as I say, I fell in love with it immediately. But I think that helped with the edit, oddly enough, because I was focused on what the UK reader was going to take from it. Whereas, obviously, Jokha and Marilyn Booth, the translator, were very familiar with Arabic culture. So I was the one sort of saying, okay, but what does that mean? What is this? And how does that, I don't understand how that fits together. And so we were able to sort of work in some more explanations so that people who weren't familiar with some of the nomenclature or the culture would be better able to go in and understand what was happening. So yeah, the edit was interesting for me because having a translation already complete meant that we were collaborating in a different way from the way you would work on a translation when you're working closely with a translator. It was quite a light edit, and yeah, I think one thing you had mentioned was the chapter titles.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first English language draft didn't have them, and I felt that although I loved the book, once it was getting out to more of our acquisition panel, a lot of the feedback was, this is quite difficult to follow. And I would admit that. I mean, the first time I read it, I wasn't completely sure I'd understood it, but I loved it anyway. So I was, I think it is one of those books that, it definitely stands up to multiple readings. But we wanted to make it as accessible as possible. So I suggested that we include chapter titles to aid readability. So there was some discussion around that because obviously they hadn't been included in the Arabic original, and Jokha had mixed feelings about it. And I initially suggested, quite longer descriptive titles, and Jokha was very against that, and then there was some more discussion. So in the end, we compromised on titling the chapters with the names of the speakers. And I think that turned out to be absolutely the right decision because it doesn't affect your reading of the chapters, but it allows you to anchor yourself better in who you're hearing from. So yeah, it was my idea initially, but the three of us collaborated on how we're going to do it, which is what publishing is very collaborative, and you want to work well, particularly with the author, has to be happy with the text, and then you've also got the translator when you're working on translated fiction. And I gather that it has helped people to follow the book. So I've been really chuffed to hear that it's helping readers. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, each chapter is each chapter is quite slim, and it shifts from each chapter to a different narrator. For the Arabic, I know that a lot of Arabic-speaking readers who have read the Arabic arrived at the same conclusion, that it was a little bit hard to follow. Most of them ended up saying that it was worth following in the end because it was such a fantastic read. And but I mean, there was the initial maybe shock factor of jumping from one character to another without any advance notice. So you kind of had to do a little bit of digging to figure out who was speaking. But I honestly think it was the right decision because it would have, you're exactly right, it made it a lot more accessible.
I think even without, I think it is a very challenging text. I absolutely mean that in a good way. I think literature has to challenge the reader and really, let you know that this is a book to be concentrated on. But for me, I really thought that in this instance, making sure that you knew who was speaking would remove one obstacle between you and the details of the characterization and structure. So I'm really glad to hear that it's worked for the people who are reading. I mean, that's what you want as an editor. You want to make sure that what you've done is help the readers engage with the book. Yeah,
and it allows the reader to focus more on the other subtleties of the text, which there are so many. And
yes, exactly.
We spent all of our effort sort of trying to suss out who is speaking here, then that would not give space to the rest of the work.
Completely agree. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So after this experience, are you more interested in Oman and working with Omani authors, if that ever becomes a thing? I don't know if it will.
Well, we did. I will say that we had a little flurry of authors, not so much from Oman specifically, but a lot of Arabic authors writing in Arabic coming into us immediately after the announcement of the win. And so it's been kind of interesting sifting through them, and there's so many different perspectives. And yeah, I think there is this tendency in the UK market to lump all translated fiction together, and of course that's ridiculous. But I would like to kind of expand my reading into the region. As I said, I'm certainly no expert in Arab literature, and this has been, the first experience really for me. It's been extremely positive. At the risk of internationalization, we do have, Sandstone's got another book out at the moment. This is by an American-Moroccan author, Anissa Bouziane. So it's called Dune Song. So based on her experiences, she was living in and working in New York until 9/11, after which New York really didn't feel like her home anymore, so she returned to Morocco. So it's dealing with identity and being an Arab in the West. It's got a lot of support again from the Edinburgh Book Festival. It's up for their first book award at the moment.
That's so interesting, yeah. And you said that's out. I'm actually making a note of that. Did you say Dune Song, like sand dunes?
Yes, like sand dunes. It's available in English and in French.
That's so amazing. I mean, it sounds like Sandstone is involved in some very interesting projects. I had a look at your website and saw that a lot of your authors have previously won, a huge number of awards, Arthur C. Clarke Awards, Man Booker International, obviously, the Man Booker itself. Do you have any other projects that are coming up soon or that have already been announced that you're particularly excited about?
Oh goodness, so many. That's the real blessing of working in publishing, and particularly working for an independent publisher, where you have that freedom to kind of, because Sandstone's list is quite small but very eclectic. So we do get to try lots of different things, and so this year I worked on a debut called Finer Things. This one was set in the 1960s in London, and it's about a professional shoplifter and an art student she encounters, and it's really brilliantly depicts the 60s and struggles of being a woman at that time. I think it was one thing that all the books that I love and get really excited about have in common. They're about women having adventures of some kind. And not necessarily in like the Hunger Games sense, but it's about women and their lives when they're a little bit out of the ordinary. The Finer Things by David Wharton. It's his debut novel, but it's just brilliant. Delia is one of the most exciting characters, and she's just brilliantly depicted, and the world comes to life. It's one of those books which I've been telling everyone. Everyone asks what you've been reading. I'm like, well, have you heard of this? And it is his debut, so that was just out in summertime. And then for next summer, I'm working on an edit right now, a book called The Actuality. So this one is about an artificial woman, Evie, who was built to replace her husband/owner's dead fiance. And so she's been kind of sequestered in this little apartment living with him, and now he's aging. He's getting to the end of his life. She doesn't know what's going to happen to her. And because of changes in the law, her existence is now technically illegal. So, without getting too much into like the spoilers of it, she will of course eventually end up in the outside world and have to deal with who she is and how she came to be, and what the world is outside of the very kind of sheltered existence she's had. Paul Braddon is the author of this one, and gets into the different ways that we look at other people and how we distinguish between what is real and who matters and who doesn't, and all those kinds of themes. and Evie's very, despite having been made essentially to be a doll, she's evolved far beyond that, becomes very resourceful and intelligent. So any project which has a woman having fabulous adventures, I'm on board immediately.
Even an artificial woman.
Even an artificial woman, I think, because, and again, we could take a little segue into feminism here. So much of what we regard as feminine is a construct, a social construct, that, deconstructing femininity, it makes sense to, if you assign all these values to an artificial being, how does that affect their sense of identity?
That's
both
so
externally
true.
and internally.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it kind of makes you reflect on the way in which you assign value to actual human beings. And women
Absolutely.
in particular. Yeah. I just wanted to catch the author's name, Paul Bryant, you said?
Oh, Paul Braddon.
Braddon, okay.
Paul Braddon, yeah. So the books I've talked about are Finer Things by David Fortin and The Actuality by Paul Braddon. That one is forthcoming. That'll be out next July in the UK.
Oh, thank you so much, Kay. This was so much fun.
No worries.
Thank you so much. That was Kay Ferrell talking about celestial bodies, as well as a couple of other really interesting sounding projects that Sandstone Press is involved in. And just in case you missed the titles and the names of the authors, I'm just going to repeat them now. The first book that was mentioned was called Dune Song by Anissa Bouziane. It's about an Arab American living in post 9/11 New York and dealing with all of the complications that come out of that, and moving back to Morocco. It's up for the Edinburgh International First Book Award. And just in case you didn't know, Edinburgh International Book Festival awards a debut author for the First Book Award, and it's one of the most amazing opportunities that debut authors get to gain recognition for the work that they do, which is hard to come by, obviously, if you're a debut author. The second book that Kay mentioned was Finer Things by David Wharton. It's Wharton. It's about two women living in London in the 60s, and one of them is an artist and the other one is a professional shoplifter. Honestly, it kind of sounds like the type of book I would normally read anyway. I'm just going to read you the little blurb on their website. It's Delia must atone for a terrible mistake. Tess is desperate to be a real artist, with the threat of the criminal underworld encroaching only if their friendship can save them from disaster. Definitely sounds like the kind of book that I would read. And finally, something to look forward to for next summer. It's The Actuality by Paul Braddon. It's Braddon. That one is the science fiction novel set in a future England about an artificial woman named Evie. Also, interestingly, sounds like another type of book that I would be into. If you're interested in any of these, or if you want to know more, just have a look at the transcript of our episode, which should be up by now, which will have links to all of these books, as well as we'll tag Sandstone Press on our Instagram account. But their Instagram is @Sandstone Press. And you can find them on their website at www.sandstonepress.com. So I hope by now that you have gained a clear enough impression of, or an idea of, what Celestial Bodies is about. As Kay has mentioned in her interview, it follows the lives of three sisters, and the trajectories of their lives, but it also encompasses the lives of the people around them, their families, their friends, and you see the way in which their lives unfold. Not just that, but it also follows it also traces back to memories of certain people, certain key characters in the novel. And what you end up getting is this beautiful mosaic of life in Oman at a particular time, but also the way in which it ends up developing. I understand more now why people were praising the structure of the novel so much. It's very well layered, and there's so much to read into it. So it really does stand up to multiple readings. I've already read it a couple of times now, and I do find myself picking up on different things, noticing different themes coming up. What I love about this book is that it gives a beautiful glimpse and an illustration of what Omani society was like at one point in history and what it's turned into in the modern day, or what it eventually would end up turning into. And, Oman has been previously, pre 1970, was extremely closed off to the outside world by design. And after 1970, things changed, I guess you could say slowly compared to neighboring countries. But the truth is, it was still a rapid development that took place. Economic development, social development, schools started getting built, hospitals, people were suddenly starting to get educated. There was a media industry that didn't exist before, and many other changes which I can't sit here and list all together. There's just so much. But that obviously took a social toll on the people. And I mean, it was mostly favorable, but there were some small aspects of life that changed, and it sort of created this nostalgia, which I think is really beautifully illustrated throughout this novel. And one of the examples of that social cost of all of this rapid development is so well illustrated by Zarifa, who is the maid of Abdullah, or Abdullah's father actually, and she was enslaved by him, and she ended up being freed. But I mean, it's very complicated, so you'd have to read the book to understand. But yes, she's the maid of Abdullah's father, Sheikh Saeed, and she's just remembering in the chapter which she's narrating. She's just remembering a bygone era before the introduction of air conditioners. So I'm just going to read out that part where she's remembering. She's prepared a big tray of food for Maya, Abdullah's wife, who's just had a baby, and she's taking it over to Maya, who is staying at her mother's house for the first 40 days after the birth of her child. She crossed the Falaj, the main canal, and then she passed the houses, the fortress-like complex where Sheikh Saeed and his family had lived forever, the school, and Hamdan's shop before her path brought her to the farms. In the past, Al-Awafi's homes emptied completely on summer days, as everyone, young and old, converged on the farmers' fields in flight from the heat, returning home only when the soft nighttime breezes wafted them there. But by this time, the early years of the 1980s, there was no need for this daily exodus. Electric fans, even air conditioners in some of the houses, put an end to these excursions. Those horrid, newfangled, heretical air conditioners, as Latifa called them. So I never really thought about how air conditioners might be perceived as negative. I never in a million years imagined that anyone would lament their introduction into homes. There are plenty of stories like this that we hear our older generations tell us about how technology has slowly erased and eroded older traditions or rituals or just little habits and characteristics. So, for example, my mom would tell me about how they basically they only drank milk in the summertime, I think it was. They only drank milk in the summertime because that was when their cows gave birth on their farms. So milk was just a summer thing. And it just kind of blew my mind that this was the case, and it never occurred to me that milk can only be produced when a cow is pregnant. And anyways, that's a whole nother topic for another day. These are stories that we grow up with, and I loved reading some more of them that were peppered throughout this book. But other than that, it was really fascinating to read stories from all of the different perspectives that were given a voice in this novel. I love the fact that there were so many different voices that were being represented. The heads of the families, the moms, the daughters and the sons, and the servants who were at once. So earlier on in the earlier sort of time period that was being that's reflected in this book, they were slaves, and then at one point, basically, slavery basically became illegal finally at one point throughout the life cycle of this novel. The members of this previously enslaved family also get a chance to tell their stories, and I think that giving them a voice and viewing things from their perspective was incredibly eye-opening and difficult to read at points because of the things that they were subjected to. And it's hard to imagine that this kind of stuff actually went on not that long ago. One of the chapters of Ankabuta, who was the mom of Zarifa, the woman who I just referenced earlier, she remembers the birth of her daughter basically on the outskirts of the town. She just had to sit down right where she was and just give birth to her baby on the 25th of September 1926, which just so happened to be the day that a treaty was signed in Geneva abolishing slavery. So it was a very symbolic moment of her giving birth, her and Ankabuta, the enslaved woman, at the age of 15, giving birth to her daughter Zarifa, who would be born free, essentially. Legally born free, but in her mentality, she wasn't. She had a very strong sense of loyalty to her family. She couldn't reconcile with the ideas that were being circulated around her community with her husband, who talked about, and her son, who talked about freedom and being independent and all of that. So initially, I was planning on getting into a bit more detail about the direction that the lives of Latifa's son and husband take with their strong desire for living truly free. But I feel like that would be giving away a little bit too much of the book, and I really want you to read it. So I'm going to end this topic on a cliffhanger, just so you can go read and come back and discuss. The theme of love is very pervasive throughout the book, and it comes up in many different manifestations. Love in the Arab culture is very complicated, and it has a lot of levels. There's many words for love in the Arabic language, as some people may already be aware. It's probably got more words. It's more different words for love than any other language, supposedly. I don't know if that's actually true, but it ranges from like love, as in like I feel warmly towards someone, to like completely passionately, deranged level of love that borders on obsession and total it like totally dominates that person's life basically. And there's levels in between, and I feel like this book is a beautiful example of all of those different types of levels. There's the friendly love, there's the mad obsession that's just totally unhealthy, there's the brotherly love, all of that. It's all here, and the exploration of that is very. There's also the concept of Western love, which like a westernized version of love, which sort of gets transplanted into the minds of the younger generations. There are so many other elements of this book that I wish I could bring up if I had more time, but I will leave it for later discussions, hopefully in the comment section of the podcast, of the website, and of the Instagram, wherever you want to leave comments, and we can keep the discussion going there. But I will say that it really has already sparked a huge amount of debate and discussion. I mean, I started asking myself a lot of questions, and it's made me more curious to know more about my own country, and I'm going to be exploring a lot more of that soon. But it's also sparked some interesting conversation with friends and family and just people in general, you know. The vast majority of people I know had mostly good things to say. Some people had negative reviews, but what was really interesting, that a small group of people I spoke to, when I asked them when they, you know, conveyed their negative reviews about the book to me, I dug a little deeper to find out why. And it became apparent that their objection to the book, or their critique of it, was that it was perverted or perverse, maybe, because it talked a lot about sex and eroticism and homosexuality, and these were all things that they felt were too taboo to be discussed. And it was interesting because as I dug even deeper and asked more questions, I realized, and you know, it's not that they were lying to me and pretending like they had read the book. I flat out just asked them, did you read it? And they said no. So that was very interesting. And I found out that most of the reviews, the negative reviews that I received, were based on other people's opinions on Twitter. I mean, I don't know what to say really. It's Twitter. It's like you'll never be able to defeat that juggernaut of fake news, you know. But what I can say is I'm really glad that I kept the conversation going with these people rather than just shutting them down and asking more questions and challenging them a little bit, because I was able to convince them that maybe they should read the book before they keep spreading this information and these negative reviews about it. Also, please don't get me wrong. I am not trying to get people to adopt my own opinion of this book and start spreading that instead. I just didn't think it was right for someone who hadn't actually read the book and just copied and pasted someone else's opinion, and maybe even that person hadn't read the book themselves. And this is how fake news gets spread. So, I mean, it wasn't my intention to get onto this discussion in the first place, but we're here somehow, so this is my opinion on it. So that really brings me to, you know, once again, the importance of discussion and hearing people out and listening to each other's opinions. It made me even more determined to keep a conversation going, and made me so happy that I chose this book as book number 1. I think it's a beautiful book to discuss in book clubs, in family circles. I feel like every Omani family should have a copy of this book and read it and discuss it with them, with their other family members, and just see what the other people think. So we have come to the end of the line, and I have a few announcements to make before wrapping up. The first thing I wanted to say was not so much an announcement as a declaration of gratitude. Thanks to you, the listener, for sticking around till the end of the show, despite the fact that it's my first episode, meaning that it's not gonna be my best episode, I hope. I'm still learning the ins and outs of all of this podcasting stuff, as you can see, and I'm gonna need a little bit more time to learn and grow with this. So thank you for listening. And I hope you will stick around to support whatever this is going to end up being. So yeah. And the second thing was more of an actual announcement. And that is to announce the winners of my giveaway. I did a little giveaway on my Instagram to celebrate the launch of this podcast, and I asked people to comment on my last post about recommending a book that moved them or impacted them in some way to one of their friends. And I asked people to participate either in English or Arabic to win a copy of Celestial Bodies in the translation and in the original. And so now I'm going to announce the winners. By the time this comes out, I will have also tagged them or contacted them, so they'll already know, but I did promise that I would announce the winners here, so here goes nothing. And the winner of the Arabic version is Surah Siegel, who recommended Al-Ayyam by Taha Hussein, which translates to Days by Taha Hussein. Congratulations, Surah. I'm going to be contacting you very, very soon. Thank you so much for participating. And the winner of the English translation of Celestial Bodies is Zuzana Arani. I hope that I got that right. Congratulations, Zuzana, and thank you so much for participating. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for your recommendation. You recommended The 40 Rules of Love by Alif Shafak, so thank you for that. And I actually have a copy of that book, and it's on my TBR. I haven't read it yet, so now that you've mentioned that it's had a strong impact on you, I'm definitely going to bump it up my TBR. But yeah, so that's it for the announcements. Other than that, if you have any comments or thoughts or opinions or anything at all that you thought you would like to share, please do so on my Instagram at Papercut Club, or on my website at www.papercut.club. And there will be more social media platforms coming up soon, so that you can comment and share on the platform of your choice. But until then, I'll be back soon with another episode, I hope. And hopefully it'll be an episode with a co-host. I have a couple lined up, so we'll see what happens. But until then, happy reading.